Welcome, everybody. So nice to see you. Um, Today, there are two more lectures, today and next week. Today, we're going to talk about the conversion of children, and we're going to look at some amazing tshuvot of Rav Moshe Feinstein. And next week, we're going to talk about an issue that's not only an issue in America, but we'll explain why it's specifically an issue in America. And that's the question of whether or not a betin of men need to be in the mikveh room when a woman is converting and what that's all about. So that'll be next week. And all the lectures, of course, afterwards and all the source material will be available. Okay, conversion of children. When we say children, we mean any boy under 13 years old and a girl under 12 years old. Are they allowed to convert? And if they convert, what are the rules about the conversion of children? Why would children be different than adults? We know that the conversion involves for a woman going to the mikveh and for a man going to the mikveh and having a bris, but it also involves the kabbalat mitzvot, the acceptance of the mitzvos. And the question is, does a child have the ability to know enough to accept the mitzvahs? So this is a question that predates America by 1,500 years at least. And the Gemara in Maseches Ksuvos actually discusses this issue. Let's see what we have here. 1 second, sorry. Can everybody see my screen? So the Gemara says the following. Gemara right here. Amar Rav Huna ger katan matbilin oso al das bezdin. That a ger katan, a convert who is a child, matbilin oso al das bezdin, you immerse him or her with the consent of the court. Now, what does that mean? So Rabbi Sfaria gives a little bit of an explanation based on Rashi. Matbilin oso al das bezdin means that a katan, a minor, doesn't have the ability to understand the mitzvos, what Kabbalah's ha-mitzvos, acceptance of the mitzvos is. So therefore, the ger katan, you immerse him or her in the mikvah, and the Kabbalah ha-mitzvos, the acceptance of the mitzvos, is done by the betin, either the court or the parents. My kamashmalan. What's it coming to teach us? Dischusulo, v'zachin la'adam shelo dischusulo, and that it's a merit, that it's a privilege, because we only do something for somebody else if it's good for them. How can you do this for them, even though it's a merit, even though it's a privilege to be a Jew, but they don't really understand it. So it's like it's shlo b'fanav. It's like it's not in front of them. Tanina, we learned zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav ve'ein chavin la'adam shelo b'fanav. So he says zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, that you can do a favor for somebody, even if it's not in front of him. Okay, we'll come back to that and we'll explain that in a minute. One last thing, then I'll explain the whole thing. I'll go off the screen and I'll explain it. The Gemara says right here, Amar Reb Yosef, line 9 or number 9, Higdilu Yachol Limchos. If when they reach, it says majority. That's not what it means. When they reach adulthood, they can protest. They can say, I don't like my life. I don't like my conversion. Okay, so what do we have here? We have a couple of very interesting things. The Gemara says that what is the mechanism by which you convert a minor, that you convert a child? The mechanism by which you convert a child is that the Kabbalas HaMitzvos, the acceptance of the mitzvos, is not done by the child, because the child can't understand what Kabbalas HaMitzvos means. But the Bezdin, the court, the rabbis there, or the parents, they accept the mitzvos on behalf of the child. That is based on the principle of Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. It's almost Pesach. All of us are going to run to the rabbi and sell our chametz before Pesach. But there's always somebody, right? There's always somebody who forgets to go to the rabbi. Oh no, what do? Right? They forget to go to the rabbi. They sit down at the Seder and they say, "Oy vey, we didn't sell our chametz." What do they have to do? They have to throw out all their food in the cabinet. They have to throw out all the food in the refrigerator. So the answer is no, because when the rabbi sells the chametz and he gives all the forms to the non-Jew to whom he sells the chametz, and he says you can go into anybody's house, you can eat the chametz, and here are the keys, and here's the landlord, and here's the doorman, and all those things. The rabbi always adds, right, Rabbi Silverberg? The rabbi adds, and there might be somebody who forgot to sell their chametz, and I'm including them in the sale as well. What right does the rabbi have to include someone to sell their chametz? They didn't contact the rabbi or anything. Maybe they didn't want to sell their chametz. So it's based on a rule. The rule is what? Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. That you do something good for somebody, even if it's not in front of them, even if they don't know that you're doing it for them. We assume, correctly, let me say, that everybody wants to sell their chametz. So therefore, the rabbi says, Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. I want to do a favor for someone, even though it's not in their presence. That rule is exactly the same rule here. The child wants to become Jewish. But the child doesn't know enough to accept the mitzvahs. But it's a good thing to become Jewish. It's a privilege to become Jewish. And therefore, Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. We perform that privilege for the child, even though the child doesn't necessarily understand what Kabbalas HaMitzvos says. But the child does have the right, when they become of age, limchos, they can protest. If the child reaches 13 years old in 5 days, 1 day, doesn't matter, and they say, I don't like my life. I became a big college football fan, and I want to watch college football on Shabbos, or whatever it is, or I love cheeseburgers, and I don't want to convert. So when he or she reaches adulthood, they are allowed to protest and to not accept the conversion. Now, whether or not that happens or it doesn't happen, we'll see in a minute. But in principle, right, it's al das bezdin. It's based on the decision of the court of the parents. But when they reach their age, they can say, I don't accept the mitzvos. I decided that I don't like my life. Okay? Now, that raises a whole set of issues regarding conversion that are not really part of the discussion of adult conversions. When it comes to America, we've seen that the rabbis, and the last thing we saw was that Rav Moshe Feinstein himself, they discuss whether or not you need a total observance, full observance by the convert. And we saw, just focus on Rabbi Feinstein for a minute, that Rabbi Feinstein believed, he quoted his father, that a convert needs to be totally observant of the mitzvos within their ability. But he understood that there were rabbis who didn't require total observance, and he wasn't ready to reject the conversion of these other rabbis. The question is, what about a child? Right? The child may not need total observance because matbilin oso al das bezdin, meaning there's a third party involved. Maybe the bezdin, maybe the court, maybe the parents are observant, and maybe that's good enough, even if the child is not him or herself so observant. Meaning you're adding a third party to the mix. And what I want to look at today is whether or not that makes a difference. And specifically, what we're going to talk about today, an amazing tshuva. What about a school where there are children in the school, a Jewish school, whose mothers are not Jewish and they were converted? Or should we convert them, even though they're not religious? Okay, so let's now begin a journey through the tshuvos that discuss conversion of children in America. Does it matter if the parents are Shomrei Shabbos? Lucky you came to class, because that is exactly what we're going to discuss today. The first tshuva, we're going to look at 3 tshuvos from Rav Moshe Feinstein, and let's start with this. Okay, we lost that. Here we go. Okay, Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein, his first tshuva discussing this question of conversion of children is he was asked a very specific question about whether or not a child requires a hatafa, which means if a child is circumcised but not by a mohel, they need to take a little bit of blood. Does that need to be done before a rabbinical court? That's not our issue. But you'll see at the end of this tshuva, it's very much our issue. This tshuva is written Yud Zayin Kislev Tuf Shin Aleph. That's the fall of 1940. Okay, 1940. Rav Moshe Feinstein is already in America. He comes in 1928, but he comes in the 1930s, the early 1930s. This is 1940, the fall of 1940. Who does he write to? Malas Kvod Gisi Ahuvi, my brother-in-law. Harav Agon, Reb Nechemia HaKohen Shlita, Av Bezdin, what is that? Toledo. Okay? His brother-in-law, I don't know who that is, Nechemia HaKohen, is the rabbi in Toledo, Ohio. Okay? And he writes about a gerus of children. And he writes a whole thing about converting the child and doing a second bris and all these things. And at the very end of the tshuva, he says something that's absolutely remarkable. Ach nachon hadavar, says Rav Moshe. It is correct. Kisheyagdil, when the child grows up and becomes bar o bat mitzvah, lehatbilo od hapam legerus. The child, when he reaches 13 or the girl reaches 12, they should be immersed a second time for conversion. Mipnei bezdin, bifnei bezdin, in front of a rabbinical court. Why? Mishum shelo barur hadavar b'medina zu shuzchus. Because it's not clear in America, 1940, that it actually is a privilege, that it actually is a good thing to convert to Judaism. You remember that you're allowed to convert a child because the Bezdin does a favor for the child, because the Bezdin allows the child to join Judaism. But he says it's not clear in America that it's a schus. Why? Kevan sheba avonosenu harabim, because of our sins. Karov shechas v'shalom lo yishmor Shabbos v'chadome. That this child is not going to be Shomer Shabbos and is not going to keep halacha. V'chadome od isur. So what happens? You convert this child to Judaism, but it's not a schus because they're going to violate all the mitzvos. And so basically they're just going to get punished for all the things they do wrong. So actually it would have been better if they stayed a non-Jew, because at least as a non-Jew, they wouldn't be punished. So you're actually doing them a disservice by converting them to Judaism because they're not going to observe the mitzvos. Very interesting. It's possible. Shemikol makom hu schus. It's possible that nevertheless it is a schus, it is a privilege to be Jewish. She'af rishei Yisrael adife me'akum. Because even the sinners among the Jewish people are better than non-Jews. V'gam hu schus, I mean, whatever he means there. V'gam hu schus, and it's always a privilege to be Jewish. Machmas denichale b'may David avid. You know, if a child converts, the reason they're converting is because their parent wants them to convert. So it might be a schus simply because the child's doing what the father wants him or her to do. That in itself is the schus. They may not be Orthodox, but if the father wants them to convert to Judaism, that itself is considered to be a schus. Ubifrat, and specifically. Acharei shegam imo nitgaira. He says, what's the case? You have a man who's married to a non-Jewish woman, and she has a child. So the child converts and the mother converts. Well, if the mother also converts, even though they're not really going to be observant, if the mother converts, sheba ofen zehu yoser schus. But if the mother converts too and you're creating a Jewish family, maybe the fact that you're creating the Jewish family, maybe that itself is the schus. Vayin b'chsam sofer siman reish nun gimel. Very interesting. The Chsam Sofer says, the beginning of the 1800s, that a child, we saw the Gemara says, when a child grows up, he can protest because I don't want to convert. But it says the Chsam Sofer, if a man is married to a non-Jewish woman, they have a child, and the mother and the child convert, and they create a Jewish family, then the child does not have a choice. He's not allowed to change his mind when he gets older. The importance of creating a Jewish family is more important, and he's not allowed to change his mind. And that Chsam Sofer is brought by the Piskei Tshuva. So it's brought on the page of the Shulchan Aruch. Lachein, therefore, Yoser Karov Shehu Schus. It makes more sense to me that it nevertheless, even if they're not going to be observant, it still is a schus. It still is a privilege. Avalotzeis midei safek legamre. But in order to avoid all questions about the status of this child, yiyatov liskar lahatbilo kishiyad. It would be better to convert the child again, to immerse the child again. Now, this tshuva of Rabbi Feinstein is absolutely remarkable. Literally, you can't believe it. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in the fall of 1940, he says, you know what? The Gemara says you can convert a child based on the principle that it's a schus for the child, that it's in the best interest of the child to convert. He says, let me tell you, he says, I don't know if that's true. Because if the child's not going to be observant, and he says 1940, the families are not observant, then maybe it's not a schus because they're going to get punished for all the things they do because now they're Jewish. But then he pulls back. Okay, this is the tug of war here within Rav Moshe Feinstein is fascinating, right? Then he says, maybe not. Maybe just the fact that he's Jewish is good because even the Jewish sinners are better than non-Jews. And then maybe it's good, it's a schus, it's a privilege because he's doing what his father wants him to do. And then it's good because they're creating a Jewish family. But nevertheless, at the end, Rav Moshe says, probably it's okay. But just to be sure, let's put the person in the mikveh again. If you were to tell a child who converted now that you should put them in the mikveh again when they become bar mitzvah, you would have a revolt among adopted children and all different kinds of situations, surrogacy, all these cases, you'd have a revolt. We would never say something like that. But Rav Moshe, dealing in a world in which most people are not observant, Rav Moshe is genuinely uncertain about the status of this child. The truth of the matter is he accepts the fact that the child is Jewish. And if you notice in the last line, he says, Tov, it would be good to immerse the child. Clearly, if you didn't immerse the child would still be Jewish. That seems to be obvious from Ramosha Feinstein. But nevertheless, Ramosha says that I'm not sure whether it's a schus, right? Ramosha is uncertain about the status. It's, by the way, this is a comment much more about his feeling about American Jewry than it is about conversion, right? It's saying that the families are not Orthodox. And since the families are not Orthodox, then maybe it's not a schus for the child. It's not a privilege for the child. So he's commenting about the way he sees American Orthodoxy in 1940. We'll see this in light of the Chuvos of Ramosha from 30 years later. We're going to see a dramatic shift within the thinking of Rav Moshe. But I want to start here to tell you where Rav Moshe started in terms of his attitude towards American Jewry and how that's reflected in terms of his attitude towards converting children within that American system. Okay, let's take a second. Any 2 minutes for comments here. Any comments on this tshuva of Rav Moshe?
I want to know if he's talking about it's one, the woman, the wife isn't Jewish, or is it a Jewish couple who's infertile that wants to adopt?
And yeah, so he doesn't say. It seems to be it's a case where the wife is where the wife is not Jewish, because he talks about the wife converting, but he doesn't make that distinction necessarily. That's a fair question. Anybody else? Okay.
One more question.
One more. This is the last one. Yeah.
Why did the Gemara say that it is an advantage for a baby to be converted?
Because it's good to avoid
idolatry.
Jewish.
I mean, there was such persecution of Jews during the time of the Talmud. It sounds like it would have been, they'd be executed.
That's not. First of all, most Jews were not executed, because if most Jews were executed, we wouldn't have Jews anymore. True. So most Jews are not executed. And even if most Jews are hated, most Jews are not executed. But it's still a schus, it's still a privilege to be Jewish. Now, it is true that when we convert someone, we tell them, you want to be Jewish. The anti-Semites don't distinguish between a convert and someone who's born Jewish. So it is true that we warn or we alert the convert to that reality. But that doesn't mean it's not a schus. That's a privilege to be Jewish. There are challenges to being Jewish, but clearly it's a privilege to be Jewish.
Do you think it would matter to Rav Moshe if the child was converted, but the mother did not convert?
Well, I mean, there's more reason. I mean, Rav Moshe says even if the mother converts, it's better to take the child to the mikvah. Clearly, Rav Moshe would say if the mother doesn't convert, it would be better to take the child to the mikvah. At least the Rav Moshe Feinstein of 1940. Okay. Next tshuva. Tuf Shin Lamed Dalet, 1974. He writes a tshuva to Rabbi Friedman of Indianapolis, Indiana. Rabbi Friedman is the rabbi of a small shul in Indianapolis. A little bit of a story about Indianapolis in the 1970s. The rabbi in Indianapolis was Rabbi Ronald Gray. Rabbi Ronald Gray was a Reitz graduate. He went to Yeshiva University, had smicha from Rabbi Soloveitchik. And he came to Indianapolis in 1971. Almost immediately upon arriving in Indianapolis, he founded a school. There were some benefactors there. Their names were the Haston family. Hasten. They were actually a famous family and still are in Jewish philanthropy. The Haston, and it was called, might still be called, the Haston Hebrew Academy of Indianapolis. The Haston Hebrew Academy of Indianapolis, founded in 1971. In 1974, there were 56 students in the school, grades K to 8. That's about 5 or 6 students per grade, though obviously it wasn't even necessarily evenly distributed. There were fewer kids in the older grades and more kids in the lower grades. But 56 students in 1974. The teachers, as was true in a lot of places, and this was true, I went to the Hebrew Academy of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a bigger school, is a bigger community, obviously, even in 1974. Our teachers were shluchim, were Israelis, generally Orthodox Israelis, who came from Israel for a couple of years. They came to make money. They came to spread, Israeli, basically they came to spread religious Zionism. I remember my bar mitzvah teacher was Mr. Schechter. He was one of those Israeli shluchim. And that's who the teachers were in Indianapolis. Of the 56 students, only about 20% of them were Shomrei Shabbos, okay? 80% of the students in the Haston Hebrew Academy of Indianapolis were not Shomrei Shabbos. Now, we're going to see the question. You need just to have one piece of halakhic information about the school. You see, as you'll find out in a minute, not only were some of the kids not Shomrei Shabbos, but some of the kids had non-Jewish mothers. Okay, some of the kids had Jewish fathers and non-Jewish mothers. The Gemara in a number of places says, Nachri shelamad Torah chayav misa. The Gemara says that a non-Jew who studies Torah is liable to the death penalty. Now, that has been narrowed over time. That's not our discussion for now, and probably doesn't apply to teaching children. But Rav Moshe is going to make use of this. You have to know there are two psukim quoted by the Gemara, one in Maseches Sanhedrin and one in Maseches Chagigah. In Maseches Sanhedrin, the Gemara quotes the pasuk, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. The Torah was taught to us by Moshe Rabbeinu. Us and not the Goyim. Not the non-Jews, sorry. Right? So you're not allowed to teach non-Jews because Torah tziva lanu Moshe. The other pasuk is a pasuk we say every morning in the davening. What do we say? It says, Lo asachein lechol goy. God didn't do the same for all the nations. Umishpatim bal yida'um. And the laws we do not teach them. That's what the Gemara in Chagigah says. Umishpatim bal yida'um. We don't teach them the laws. We don't teach them Torah. So two psukim, two Gemaras that say you can't teach non-Jews Torah. Okay, so number one, the Haston Hebrew Academy, 56 students, teachers Orthodox, 20% of the students Shomrei Shabbos, some students non-Jewish mothers, Rabbi Ronald Gray. Let's see what Rav Moshe Feinstein writes to them. This is, again, amazing tshuva, 1974. Says Rav Moshe, Uvadavar shebe Beit Sefer Hayomi. That's a funny way to say it. Beit Sefer Hayomi means in the day school. Shenit Yasei, that was founded. Al Yidei B'nei Torah V'yirei Hashem Yisbarach. It was founded by Orthodox people. V'hamenahel v'hamorim, and the principal and the teachers. Kulam Yireim Ushleimim. They're all religious people. V'nodu, and it became known. Shaharbe Talmidim, that many of the students, I don't know how many of the students, but he says many of the students. Hey Minachrios, he says they're the children of non-Jewish mothers. Shenit Gairu Eitel HaReform, Veitel HaConservative. Sheno Klum. So he says they wanted to take non-Jewish children in the Jewish day school, but their mothers converted through the Reform movement or through the conservative movement. She'eno klum, which is nothing, which is valueless. And so therefore the children halachically are not Jewish. Im ba'ofen she'i efshar yiyeh lahotziam mi beit hasefer. In a situation where you can't remove them from the school. Now, it might be they couldn't move them to school because they couldn't throw them out. But probably they couldn't move them to school because there are only 56 students in the school. If they got rid of these kids, there'd be no school anymore. האם מחויבים אותם שכל פרנסתם מזה להניח משרסם? Do the teachers have to leave based on Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe? If there's a prohibition against teaching Torah to a non-Jew, so do they have to leave their jobs because they're not allowed to teach Torah to non-Jews? Hine kasha lefanai lomar. It's difficult for me to say, says Rav Moshe. Davar muchlat, something absolute. Bishasha nogel parnasasam shehu chaye nefesh. I'm not going to tell people to leave their jobs how they make a living. V'nisayon gadol badavar shalahuskar baposkim. He says no one discusses this before, but you have to leave because the kids. There are some kids whose mothers have reformed conversion. He says that's not discussed anywhere. V'lo yadua lanu memele pratei didim bazeh. Rav Moshe Feinstein is very hesitant to tell these teachers they have to leave their job. These teachers from Israel came all the way to Indianapolis, and they're teaching in the Jewish day school. And Rav Moshe Feinstein is going to tell them they have to quit. That doesn't make sense. Since the children believe that they are Jewish, the holchim lebeis hasefer lilmod mitam shehu maseh yahadus leka isra. These are a funny type of children because their mothers don't have an acceptable halachic conversion, but obviously they consider themselves Jewish. Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, they want to be part of Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. So he says that it might be a different category. V'gam efshar, it's also possible. Michevan sheharav lo meid ha'ikar im talmidim shem Yisraelim ksherim. Says since most of the students are Jews, leka isur. Okay, he makes a different argument that since most of the students are Jewish, you don't have to worry that some of the students are non-Jews. I'll just tell you that in the 1950s and 60s, Rabbi Pinchas Teitz from Elizabeth, used to give a class on the radio. And there were some people who opposed the class on the radio because he was teaching non-Jews Torah. And he said like this, same thing as Moshe says, that some of the people are Jews. I'm teaching for the Jews. Anyone can listen, but I'm teaching for the Jews. Ukmoshe Kasav, Hatosfos Sheba Rabbochanan Bechagiga Daf Yud Gimel, Ein Mo Dire Maskle Mosrim, Dika Lifnei Iver Mitam Shoakum Asulul Motorah, Ulai Al Ktanehem Leka Isurzu. He says again, the prohibition, that's another thing. The prohibition is not on the children. There's no prohibition to teach children Torah. Vigam lo nemar akum shelamad Torah ela akum she'asak. Ulai ein ze belimud hamalamed in matinokos. Maybe the prohibition is only for a non-Jew who himself studies Torah. But to teach non-Jews may not be a prohibition. To teach non-Jewish children may not be a prohibition. So Moshe Feinstein has a whole bunch of different ways, 3 different ways to legitimize what these teachers are doing. Number 1, most of the students are Jewish. Number 2, there's no prohibition on the children. And number 3 is that it only applies goy shalamad, akum shalamad Torah, sha'asak batorah. But not teaching their children, it would not be considered a problem. But again, Rav Moshe Feinstein feels the need to explain it that way because Rav Moshe doesn't feel comfortable telling these shluchim from Israel they have to give up their job. Even ideally, they shouldn't teach in such a school, but I would never tell them to leave their jobs. ואם בשביל זה יסבתו כל בית הספר, וילכו בשביל זה גם ילדי ישראל הקשיים לבתי ספר של המדינה, שילמדו שם ענייני כפירה. And he says, and if the school closes down because these non-Jewish kids leave, and the Jewish kids will go to the Beit Sefer Shal Medina, they'll go to public school. Sheyilmadu sham inyanei kfira, that they'll learn kfira. I don't know if you learn kfira in public schools, but whatever you learn, halo yoser tov shlo yazvu mishar sam shlo yizbato Beit Sefer. And obviously, if that's what's keeping the school going, he understands there are 56 students. There are 56 students. Sorry, so therefore you don't want to close down the school. Meaning the kofim the yumatu gamis yaude Yisrael in yonei kvira chas v'shalom. He says that also if they leave their jobs, so the teachers they'll get will be non-religious Jews, and they'll also teach bad things. They should not leave their jobs. Asher al kain ein lomar davar zeh. But so Rav Moshe says they shouldn't leave their jobs. But now Rav Moshe has another suggestion what they can do. Aval ha efshar litake. He says, I have another suggestion to fix this problem. De'es haketanim yigayu, sorry. Let's convert these children of the mothers who had a conservative or reform conversion. Ki heim em tzrichim kabbalas mitzvos. Because again, they don't need to accept the mitzvos. V'yigaru mal das bezdin. Because as long as the bezdin thinks it's a good idea, they can convert them. V'huschus lahem, and it's a merit for them. Ki mikevan shalomdim b'veisefer dati. Because since they're learning in an Orthodox school, Eitzel Morim Yirei Shamayim, with Orthodox teachers, Hare Matsui Sheyitgadlu Leo Shomrei Torah. He says, because they're going to grow up to be religious. Shalachein Afshu Safek who's Chus Vadai. Even though you don't know that they're going to grow up to be religious, but it's definitely a schus, it's definitely a privilege. They have the opportunity to learn with religious teachers. V'gam af im lo yiskadlu lios shomrei Torah. Even if they're going to grow up and they're not going to be observant. Mistaber shehu schus. It still is a schus. It still is a privilege. Dirishe Yisrael. This is what he said in the other tshuva. Because even the sinners of Israel, sheish lam kedushas Yisrael, but they have sanctity of being Jewish. Umitzvasan she'osin hu mitzvah. And the mitzvos they do are real mitzvos. And the sins like them, they're unintentional. They don't mean it. It's better to be a Jewish sinner than a non-Jew. And I think that the balabatim, that their parents, that the parents of the school will accept that kind of arrangement. Then he says something really interesting. V'gam hagedolim mi b'nei Yud Gimel. You know, 8th grade. Some of the children are above 13, or the girls above 12. I think even the kids who are above bar and bat mitzvah, im yomru lahem shetrichim lehiskayer. If you tell them they have to convert, v'chen hagedolos mi b'nos Yud Beis devadai yisratzu. If they've gone to a Jewish school, then they're definitely going to want to convert. And therefore you have to convert them as well. And when you explain to them why they should convert, you should say it in a nice way. Of course, people will listen. Now, this, everybody, is absolutely amazing. What's amazing about this? What's amazing about this is the Rav Moshe Feinstein, who in 1940 told the Gerim who were converted when they were children that they should go to the mikveh again when they become bar and bat mitzvah. In 1974, when he has the question of the Jewish day school, the Orthodox day school in Indianapolis, what Rav Moshe Feinstein says is the best thing to do is to convert to children. Best thing is to convert to children. And it's a schus, it's a merit for them because they're going to Jewish schools. But then he says something that's unbelievable. He says you should convert the kids who are over bar and bat mitzvah, even though they may not be Orthodox. But if they go to a Jewish school, that in itself is a reason to convert these children. Now, let's just take it back for a second. That's a real pivot in Rav Moshe Feinstein. right? Moshe Feinstein is not talking about having them go to the mikveh again. Moshe is just saying it's absolutely a schus for them. It's absolutely a merit for them. They're going to Jewish schools, and even if they're above bar and bat mitzvah, they should convert because they're part of the community by going to Jewish schools. Now, we can't be blind to the fact that Moshe Feinstein is obviously sensitive to the vulnerability of the school. He writes, the possibility is 56 students that the school might close down. Now, that doesn't mean that Moshe would give a psak halacha, that would give a decision that was wrong. But if Moshe, even if he thought that it may not be ideal in all situations, it may not be true if you're in an Orthodox community where the schools are big. But in this case, where the school is kind of on the edge of whether it's going to survive, then you can definitely convert the children, consider it a privilege for them. Even the older children, you can consider it a privilege. They become part of the community. So here Moshe Feinstein says, just to summarize it, that being a student in an Orthodox day school, studying with Orthodox teachers, that's both a schus, a privilege, and for the older children, it's enough reason for them to convert. It's considered to be Kabbalas HaMitzvos, even though they may come from non-Orthodox families. Because if they're in a Jewish school, that is a step towards Orthodoxy, and they can convert based on that. That's pretty good. I'll tell you that many years ago, I started doing conversions when I was the associate rabbi in KJ under Rabbi Lookstein. And Rabbi Lookstein, when they brought children, to convert, whatever the case was, right? There were children who needed to convert. What Rabbi Lookstein always said was, I will not convert the children unless you have them committed to going to Jewish day schools. Okay, that's what Rabbi Lookstein always said. I didn't know this Jew for Moshe Feinstein, but this Jew is exactly the same point. If you go to a Jewish school, then you can convert, even if the family is not necessarily Orthodox. But if you go to a Jewish school, that's a schus. That's being part of the Orthodox community. You have a chance to be observant. That's enough reason to convert. That's fantastic. Now, I'll stop for a second. Any comments? Any comments? No? Okay. So, next case. Berkeley, California, 1976. The rabbi in Berkeley is Rabbi Yosef Leibowitz. He was the rabbi of the Orthodox shul for the Orthodox shul is called Beth Israel. He was the rabbi of the shul for 15 years. Again, a musmach of Reitz of Rabbi Soloveitchik. And he was also the head, this is going to be important, of the Beis Din of Northern California. He founded the Hillel Academy of the East Bay in 1973. This is written by Rav Moshe, or about Rav Moshe, we'll see what that means in a second, in 1976. There were about 50 to 60 students in the school, about 6 children each class, 20% Shomrei Shabbos. Now, this tshuva is a little different because Rav Moshe Feinstein didn't write this tshuva. The Igros Moshe were written during Rav Moshe Feinstein's lifetime. Rav Moshe Feinstein died in 1986. But in the last 20 years, they found a whole bunch of material that either was written by Rav Moshe that was not included in Igros Moshe, or stories about Rav Moshe's decisions that were told that were related by his grandson, Rabbi Mordechai Tendler, who was his Misharis, who was his right-hand man for many, many years. And here I'm going to read you a story told by Rabbi Mordechai Tendler about what his grandfather, Rav Moshe Feinstein, said to this rabbi, Rabbi Leibowitz, about the situation in Berkeley. Let's look at the source. Okay. Gerus Yoladim Ktanim Sheyigdalu Bebatim Shel Anashim Sheinam Shomei Torah Mitzvot. Okay, exactly the same case that we had, where you have children who are gonna grow up in non-Orthodox home. Can you be Megai? V'siper li Rabbeinu, and Rabbi Tendler says that Ramosha Feinstein explained to me. Sheheshiv Kama She'elos bin Yane Gerus Leizer Rabbi California. That is this Rabbi Leibowitz in California. And the principle that he taught him, he says Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. We don't want to make converts. He says, and in a case where they're going to grow up in families that are not religious, generally speaking, we don't want to convert. Even though b'di'eved, the conversion works because it's done in front of a bezdin, exactly like Ramosha said the other places, because it's still a privilege, it's still a merit to be Jewish. Aval b'mitzius. But now he says to the rabbi in Berkeley, practically speaking, but there are many people like this in your community in Berkeley. Zosomeres, what does that mean? There are many Jews who married non-Jewish women. V'choshev harav, and Ramosha says, and the Rabbi Leibowitz believes, shal yedei ma sheyegayer es hayeladim, if they convert the children, ze yikra v'savihem ladas, that their father will become more religious. The mother's not Jewish. It's not clear. It doesn't sound like the mother converts, but the father will become more Orthodox. As af shegam b'mikra ze la yachid einanu me'unyanim begerus. Even though in individual cases we're not interested in this kind of conversion, to haliteu l'rasha v'yamos, because just let the bad people go, right? We're not interested in saving everybody. Mikol makom, nevertheless, the harbe anoshim yesh inyan, right? If you're talking about a large group of people, yesh inyan shel hora'asha'a v'yesh lahaka. Says there's something called hora'asha'a, which means the needs of the moment that you can be lenient. Zot omeret, this says zos omeres, she'az yesh lahanig legayer es hayeladim. You are allowed in this case to convert the children whose father is not Orthodox, and maybe whose mother is not Jewish. B'tikva sheze yigrom kiruv lavos, that it will lead to getting closer to avos, means their fathers, but it really means to the tradition. Dize inyan shel hatzalas kihila mihitbolulut, because this is a situation of saving a community from assimilation. You can convert these children, even though they're going to grow up in non-Orthodox homes, and even though we don't like converts generally, but in this case, you can convert the children. And one last point. When he wrote his commentary on Masechah Shabbos, he found the proof that you're allowed to convert children, even if they're going to be part of non-Orthodox families. Because it's a merit for the kid to be a Jew, even though he's going to violate most of the mitzvahs. To kodem kol, now he's going to explain again. The fact that he's going to violate the mitzvos, he doesn't know any better. That when he knows about his Judaism, he says now they're helpless children, and hopefully they'll grow up and they'll be Orthodox. Vishenis kishem, sorry, Vishenis kisheyesh lo kedushas Yisrael ze gam kein mal. He says if he has kedushas Yisrael, that's also a positive. V'gam al yedei geruso ma sheyakayim me'amitzvos yekabel al zeh sachar ki Yisrael. And also, whatever he does, if he converts, then when all the good things he does, he will be like a Jew. So what does Rav Moshe say? Well, the second thing Rav Moshe says is very much in line with what Rav Moshe says up to now. And that is that for children to convert, it's only a positive for children to convert. Rav Moshe Feinstein really has come full circle since the fall of 1940, where he thought the children had to go to the mikveh again. There's no question, he says, that especially if they go to Jewish schools, but if they have a chance to be Orthodox, and they're part of an Orthodox shul, and they have a chance to make their families more religious, it clearly is a schus, it clearly is a privilege. But here, Rav Moshe, it's an interesting story. In Indianapolis, Rav Moshe was interested more in the school. Because the kids were part of an Orthodox school, you could convert them even though they wouldn't be religious. Here, there is this Orthodox school, but he's more interested in the community. He's more interested in the shul, Beth Israel. And he says that you're going to save the families, but you're going to save the shul. That's the impression that he gives. Maybe that's the impression that Rabbi Leibowitz gave him, that it was such a serious problem, you'd save the shul. And if you convert the children, the shul will be better. The shul will be more religious. And therefore, the fathers will come back to Orthodoxy. And therefore, it's a schus, it's a privilege to everybody. What you see from here is, first of all, you see a language used by Rav Moshe, an approach used by Rav Moshe that he didn't use when he talked about adults. This idea that you consider the fact that they're part of a Orthodox school, they're part of the fact that they're part of an Orthodox community, that's a factor. That's a new idea in Rav Moshe. That's an idea Rav Moshe is very much aware of the realities within America. Just like in 1940, he knew that the families weren't Orthodox and they weren't going to Jewish schools. They weren't part of Orthodox schools, that you have to go to the mikveh again. But in the 70s, he felt differently. He felt it's good for the school. It's good for the families. It's good for the shul. It's good for the families. He's very much aware of the realities of 1970s America. And he's aware of the fact that we're not as strict when it comes to converting children. And therefore, if there are other factors, the school, the shul, right, then we're willing to convert children, even though in a regular situation, we may not convert people in such a case. So here we have yet another example of America, conversion in America. And we're even for Rav Moshe Feinstein, who began in 1928 by saying, quoting his father when he was still in Lithuania, that I'm against conversion unless they're totally observant. But Rav Moshe Feinstein understood that the realities in America were not like that. The realities of the Orthodox community required certain leniencies in terms of conversion. And that's really, really interesting in terms of conversion of children. 2 minutes for questions. Take it away. Okay.
I got a question. Okay, going into the middle of the 70s, there are why you have to deal with the motivation of why these people are sending their kids to a Jewish school. That may be to avoid busing.
Doesn't matter. Does not matter. If they're in an Orthodox school, they have a chance to become Orthodox. That's all Rav Moshe says. One more comment. Okay. Thank you very much. A treat always to learn with you. Look forward to having you join us next week for the final class. The final class will be about the issue about whether men dayanim, the men on the Bezdin, should be in the mikveh room when women go to the mikveh. See everybody next week. Be well.
Thank you.
You.